For 20 years, Sandra's entire professional vocabulary was organized around a single axis: not diagnosis, not prognosis, not survival rates or discharge timelines, or the specific calculus of when to escalate and when to hold. Those things existed, and she knew them well. But in a burn unit, the central variable, the one that determines every clinical decision from the moment a patient arrives, is pain. How much, where, what kind, what protocol addresses it, and at what dose, and at what point that dose stops being therapeutic and starts being something else. She had been making those assessments for 2 decades. She was good at them. Then her heart stopped, and she felt nothing. Not reduced sensation, not the blunting you get with high-dose opioids, where the edges stay, but the center softens. Absolutely nothing. The rotator cuff she had been managing for 7 months, a partial tear she had put off addressing because there was never a good week for surgery, never a convenient time to be off her feet, vanished. The specific fatigue of 20 years of 12-hour shifts, the weight that had settled into her lower back and shoulders so gradually she had stopped noticing it was there, gone. The dull baseline discomfort that she had carried so long, it had become her definition of normal, all of it, simultaneously. As if someone had reached into the machinery of her nervous system and removed something she had always assumed was structural. Sandra is not a mystical person. She told me that early in our first conversation, and I believed her because it is the same thing I might have said 10 years ago, and I know exactly what that sentence means. She grew up in a family that was not religious in any formal sense. She did her nursing training at OHSU here in Portland. She chose the burn unit because burn care requires a specific kind of sustained technical attention, and she was good at that kind of attention, and because the patients needed the best you had, every shift without exception. She had found that motivating for 20 years. She was 47 years old. The cardiac event was not a result of any underlying condition she had known about. It was an anaphylactic response, a severe allergic reaction to a component of the anesthetic protocol used during a routine laparoscopic cholecystectomy, gallbladder removal, an outpatient procedure. She had monitored patients through it hundreds of times in post-op. She had every reason to expect she would be home by evening. The anaphylaxis produced cardiovascular collapse, ventricular fibrillation transitioning to asystole. She was on the table for 3 minutes and 11 seconds of clinical death before the anesthesiologist achieved return of spontaneous circulation on the second defibrillation attempt. She woke up in the recovery room asking Dr. Reyes about a comment he had made. Here is what I need you to understand about that comment, and why it matters, and why I am going to hold it until later in this account. Because if I tell you about it now, before I tell you about Leo, you will understand the mechanism, but not the weight of it. And the weight is the whole point. Let me tell you who Leo Torres was first. He was 24 years old. He played guitar in a band called Secondhand Radio, which I know because his mother, Maria, told me the name when she handed Sandra a photograph in the second week of his admission. Not a phone photo, a printed photograph, 4x6, that she had brought specifically to leave at the nursing station. He was mid-set, standing in front of a speaker stack, wearing a t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, laughing at something happening to the left of the frame. The photograph was dated 3 months before the fire. Maria wanted the nursing staff to know who her son was before the burn unit had received him. The fire was electrical, an apartment above his. He had been asleep. 60% total body surface area burns, full thickness across his back, shoulders, and both arms. The kind of presentation where the initial assessment requires making decisions that are simultaneously medical and something else, something that does not appear in any protocol Sandra had ever read. She assessed his pain 63 times across 11 weeks. She documented every number. She managed the opioid protocols through the debridement procedures and the graft procedures and the dressing changes. The dressing changes, which are the specific cruelty of burn care that Sandra has described to me as the hardest part to witness across 20 years, because they are necessary and they are agonizing, and there is no version of them that is not both of those things simultaneously. Leo screamed during dressing changes. He begged her to stop. He also, in the intervals between procedures, talked to her about his bandmates and a girlfriend named Priya who came every day, and about the guitar he was going to play differently if he made it through this. Something about fingering patterns he had been developing before the fire. In the 4th month of his stay, during a graft procedure, his hemodynamics became unstable. Blood pressure dropped significantly. The team managed it, stabilized him, completed the procedure. When he came around afterward, he told Sandra he had been somewhere. He called it the quiet place. He described it as the absence of pain, not pain management, the structural elimination of it. He said the burning had simply stopped, not reduced, stopped. And then there was silence and warmth and a quality of presence that he was not able to describe with the vocabulary he had available, but which he was certain he had not constructed. Sandra was precise with me about her response. She did not dismiss him. She listened. She asked a few questions in the clinical manner she would use with any patient reporting a significant subjective experience. She concluded and documented that the experience was consistent with hypoxic phenomena during hemodynamic instability, likely modulated by the opioid protocol already in place. She wrote in his chart, patient reported NDE type perception during hemodynamic crisis, consistent with hypoxic confabulation and opioid effect. No follow-up indicated. 6 months later, 2 weeks before his death, he told her again. He said, "I'm not afraid anymore. I know where I'm going. The quiet place is waiting." She wrote, patient expressing acceptance and resignation, likely morphine-related. Monitor for distress escalation. Leo died on a Thursday afternoon in November of 2017. Sandra was off that shift. She found out the following morning from her charge nurse. I want to tell you what Sandra experienced in 3 minutes and 11 seconds on an operating table at OHSU in 2022. She separated from her body. She described it the way nurses describe things when they are trying to be honest without overstating, with clinical brevity, as a fact. She was above the table. She could see the IV line in her left arm, the position of the anesthesiologist at the head of the table, the overhead light at the angle she had seen it from below before she lost consciousness. She noted, without knowing why she was noting it, that a supply cart near the door had been positioned differently than she would have expected, and then, almost immediately, the absence arrived. She has described it to me as less like the removal of something, and more like the sudden recognition that something had been present, always present, and was now gone. Like a sound you have been hearing for so long that you have categorized it as silence. Her rotator cuff, the lower back tension, the specific exhaustion of the last 3 shifts of a busy week, the accumulated weight of 20 years of being the person in the room who had to keep measuring, all of it gone, in the time it took her to register that it was gone. And then she was somewhere else, not a room. She makes that distinction carefully, the way every person who has been in this space makes it when I ask. Not a room, not a tunnel, not a darkness with a light at the end. A quality of presence, warmth in the way that the absence of cold is warmth, not in the way a heater is warmth. And within that presence, someone she recognized. Leo Torres. Not the Leo from the burn unit. She is careful about this distinction. Not the Leo from the photograph either. Not the laughing musician in the cut-off shirt, though she had held that image in her memory for 5 years. The Leo that existed underneath both of those versions and would continue after both of them. The one Maria had been trying to preserve by handing over that photograph in week 2. The essential person, the irreducible fact of him, before and beyond anything that had happened in room 12. He was not in pain. There was no communication in language. Sandra has been precise about this across every conversation I have had with her, and I have found the precision useful because it matches every other account I have encountered in this specific detail. not words. What she described was understanding, direct, more accurate than language, the way that knowing someone's face is more accurate than reading their description. She understood, with complete certainty, that he had been to the quiet place before she arrived, that the description he had given her 4 months into his admission and the certainty he had expressed in the final weeks of his life were not confabulation. They were reporting. He had been trying to tell her. She had written morphine-related confabulation in his chart, and he had been trying to tell her what he knew. She came back because of Dr. Reyes. What pulled her back, what gave the return its specific mechanism, was the sound of his voice and the resident's voice and a comment that had been made while she was clinically dead. Dr. Reyes was describing an irrigation technique to a second-year resident, a specific angle, a specific fluid volume, a reference to how he had managed a previous case. Not dramatic. The kind of clinical instruction that happens in operating rooms thousands of times every day. Low salience, functionally invisible to anyone not engaged in the conversation. Sandra's body was in a systole when he said it. She reported it to him in the recovery room within the first 30 minutes of being conscious. She gave him the specific words, the technique, the volume, the reference to the previous case. She asked him if she had the details right. He confirmed them. He told me, when I later followed up with Dr. Reyes by email, that he had no explanation for how she had heard the exchange. He had reviewed the monitoring data from the event. She had been in a systole. There was no period of partial consciousness that could account for auditory perception. He said, "I told her exactly what she had reported. I don't have a framework for how she heard it." Sandra's verification did not stop with Dr. Reyes. She waited a year before calling Maria Torres. She has said that the waiting was partly practical, she needed to find the right approach, and partly something else. She was aware of the weight of using Leo's death to process her own experience, and she wanted to be careful about that. She had kept the business card Maria had given her in week 2, an insurance adjuster. She had carried it in the back pocket of a wallet she had replaced twice since 2017. She called. She told Maria she had a question and that she wanted to ask it carefully. She asked whether Leo had ever used the phrase, "the quiet place," and if so, when. Maria was quiet for a long time. She said, "He used it every day in the last 2 weeks of his life." She said the whole family had heard it. She said, "We thought it was the medication. None of us understood what he meant. But he said it every morning. He would wake up and he would say, 'I know where I'm going. The quiet place is waiting for me.' Every morning. We didn't know what to do with it." Sandra had documented the phrase twice in his chart, both times attributed to morphine-related confabulation. Maria was describing 11 consecutive days of the same phrase, the same certainty, the same specific vocabulary, and she had never seen Sandra's chart notes. She was reporting from memory what her son said in the last days of his life. 2 sources, neither one aware of what the other had documented. Penny Sartori worked as an intensive care nurse in Wales for 17 years. She began her formal research into near-death experiences in 1995 after one of her long-term ICU patients asked her to let him die in peace and described, in the process, an experience she could not account for within the clinical framework she had been trained in. She spent the next 10 years conducting a prospective study, the kind that requires ethics board approval, standardized interview protocols, and carefully documented controls, across the ICU at Singleton Hospital. She was awarded her PhD for the research in 2005. Her study documented 39 NDEs among cardiac arrest survivors, 18% of the patients in her sample who survived. The findings were published by Edwin Mellon Press in 2008. One of her most consistent findings, documented across her entire NDE cohort, was the complete elimination of pain during the NDE period. I want to be precise about the word complete because Sartori is precise about it. Not pain management in the clinical sense, not the reduction that happens with effective opioid protocols, not the threshold elevation that occurs in some shock states, elimination, Patients who had been in documented, chart-confirmed, high-level pain up to the moment of cardiac arrest described entering a state in which pain was absent, not lowered, not replaced by something else, not present. From a clinical standpoint, this is anomalous in a specific way. A hypoxic brain, one in which blood flow and oxygenation are being progressively lost, should not be producing cleaner subjective experience than it was producing at full function. The analogy would be a generator failure improving the quality of a recording. It is not what the mechanics suggest should happen. Kenneth Ring spent 4 decades at the University of Connecticut studying near-death experiences. His 1980 book, Life at Death, established one of the first empirical frameworks for this research, moving beyond case collection into systematic pattern analysis. His later research, which he called the Omega Project, examined what happens to people who have had these experiences in the months and years afterward. More than half of his subjects reported measurable changes in sensory processing after their NDE. Not just subjective impressions, changes in how their nervous systems responded to light, sound, and other sensory input, as if the experience had recalibrated something. Ring noted, with the caution of a researcher who had spent 40 years learning where to be careful, that the quality of perception reported during NDEs was consistently described as more vivid, more structured, more precisely real than ordinary consciousness, which is the opposite of what a brain in the process of losing function should produce. Sandra is a burn unit nurse. She has a specific clinical frame for this observation. She has watched what extreme, unmanaged pain does to consciousness, the way it narrows the perceptual field to the immediate moment, reduces language to fragments, collapses the capacity for anything beyond the present sensation. High pain does not enhance awareness. High pain degrades it. It is one of the things that makes burn care difficult to witness, even for experienced clinicians. You can see the narrowing happening in real time. The patient you were talking to 5 minutes ago is not available in the same way once the pain reaches a certain threshold. Sandra flatlined for 3 minutes and 11 seconds. She came back describing the quality of her perception during that period as the clearest she had ever experienced. She does not have a framework that closes around that observation. She told me she has been trying to build one since 2022, and that every framework she constructs accounts for part of the phenomenology, but not for Leo. Not for the specific certainty she felt in that space. Not for what Maria said about 11 consecutive mornings of the quiet place is waiting. I need to tell you about a patient from my 3rd year at Providence, Portland. I will call her Camille. She was 19 years old. She had been a passenger in a vehicle struck in the fuel tank, 35% full-thickness burns. She spent 6 weeks in the burn unit before transferring to a rehabilitation facility. In her 3rd week, during a dressing change, she had a brief cardiac event, ventricular fibrillation lasting 2 minutes and 40 seconds, restored by standard defibrillation. She had already been at the upper edge of our opioid protocol. Additional opioids risked respiratory compromise, and we had been managing that balance for 10 days. When she came back, she told me the burning had stopped. Not the burning from the dressing change procedure, all of it. The burning everywhere, the whole accumulated fact of 35% burns that had been her entire physical experience for 3 weeks. She said it stopped all at once, like a switch. She said it was the first moment in 3 weeks that she did not feel like she was on fire. I was in my 3rd year. I was not a bad nurse. I was a tired nurse at hour 11 of a shift, with 2 other patients waiting and an incident report to file. I told her it was a common experience after cardiac events. I told her the brain creates temporary states that can include the absence of pain. I told her she would feel better in a few days. I moved to the next room. I did not document what she told me, not because I was hiding anything, because documenting it would have required me to engage with it, and I was not in a state to engage with it that shift. 20 years later, after my own surgery in 2019, I pulled her chart. I read every entry I had written for that shift. I had written vitals. I had written post-event monitoring protocol. I had written that she appeared stable. I had not written a single word about what she told me in that first hour. I do not know what happened to Camille after her transfer to rehabilitation. I do not know if she ever told anyone else what she experienced. I do not know whether the burning stopping was the beginning of something that mattered to her for the rest of her life, or whether she eventually filed it under what I had told her to file it under. I think about her more than I think about most patients from those years. Sandra went back to the burn unit after her recovery. She still works there. The 0 to 10 scale is still on the wall. She still uses it because it is a useful clinical tool, and she is a clinician, and the work requires accurate pain assessment regardless of what she now understands about where pain sits within the larger structure of what is happening to her patients. But when a patient tells her about the quiet place, or the warmth, or the absence, or the people who were there, or any version of what Leo told her on 2 documented occasions across a 5-month admission, she writes it down. She writes, "Patient reports NDE consistent experience during hemodynamic crisis. Documented for follow-up, not morphine-related confabulation. Just the record that it happened, the date, the patient's own words. No clinical interpretation that closes the conversation. She told me that Maria Torres calls her occasionally. They do not have a formal relationship. They do not meet in person. But Maria calls sometimes and they talk about Leo, And Sandra told me that when she told Maria about the quiet place, about what she had experienced in those 3 minutes and 11 seconds, and what she now understood Leo had been trying to describe to her on 2 occasions while he was still alive, Maria was quiet for a long time. And then she said, I knew it was real. I always knew it was real. I just needed someone who believed him too. The 0 to 10 scale is still on the wall. The protocols are still in place. The work is the same work it has always been, to assess the pain, to manage it, to stay present for the patients who need the best you have. Sandra knows something she did not know before she flatlined. The scale measures one thing. What is carrying her patients through what the scale is measuring is something else entirely. In 3 minutes and 11 seconds on an operating table in Portland, she found out what it is. She does not have a clinical name for it. She does not need one.